Africa, a continent of immense natural wealth and vibrant cultures, possesses a profound history. Its diverse landscapes and societies once thrived with intricate trade networks and sophisticated political systems. Yet, a dramatic shift occurred, fundamentally altering its trajectory. This transformation was not an internal evolution, but an external imposition. It was a period when European actions profoundly reshaped the continent. This historical examination delves into how Europe's engagement led to the underdevelopment of Africa. Before the late 19th century, Africa was not a blank slate awaiting discovery. It was a continent characterized by a rich tapestry of diverse kingdoms and empires. Thriving trade routes crisscrossed its vast expanse, connecting sophisticated societies. These pre-colonial African civilizations boasted complex political structures and advanced agricultural practices. They engaged in extensive commerce, both internally and with other continents. This era showcased Africa's inherent capacity for self-governance and development. However, the late 19th century ushered in a new and aggressive era. This period is historically known as the Scramble for Africa. It marked an unprecedented rush by European powers to claim African territories. The motivations driving this scramble were multifaceted. Economic ambition stood as a primary driver, fueled by the Industrial Revolution's demand for raw materials. A thirst for power and geopolitical dominance also played a significant role. European nations sought new markets for their manufactured goods. They also desired strategic control over global trade routes. This combination of economic and political imperatives ignited the race for African land. The continent was systematically carved up by European powers. This division occurred with little to no regard for existing African boundaries or ethnic groups. It was an arbitrary partitioning, driven solely by European interests. The formalization of this division took place at the infamous Berlin Conference. Held between 1884 and 1885, this gathering of European powers decided Africa's fate. No African representatives were invited or consulted. The consequences of the Berlin Conference were catastrophic and far-reaching. It ignored existing African political structures and cultural affiliations. This disregard sowed the seeds of future conflict and instability. The conference legitimized the European conquest of Africa. It marked the official beginning of a new era of systematic exploitation. This period would fundamentally alter Africa's economic, social, and political landscape for generations. The primary driver of European engagement in Africa was extensive resource extraction. The continent was rich in valuable commodities. These included rubber, diamonds, gold, copper, and various agricultural products. These resources were plundered through often brutal and inhumane means. European colonial powers employed coercive methods to maximize their gains. The human cost of this extraction was immense and devastating. Forced labor was systematically implemented across the continent. African populations were compelled to work in mines, plantations, and infrastructure projects. This labor was often unpaid and under horrific conditions. The Congo Free State under King Leopold II of Belgium serves as a stark example. His regime subjected the Congolese people to unimaginable atrocities. Millions perished due to forced labor, mutilation, and disease. This systematic exploitation had a devastating demographic impact. African populations were decimated by violence, famine, and disease. The loss of life profoundly affected social structures and future generations. Local economies were crippled by these exploitative practices. Traditional industries and trade networks were dismantled. They were replaced by systems designed to serve European metropolitan needs. European powers established self-serving governance structures. These systems were not designed for the welfare or development of African societies. Their sole purpose was to facilitate resource extraction and control. Infrastructure, such as railways and ports, was indeed built. However, this infrastructure was primarily designed to transport resources out of Africa. It connected mines and plantations directly to coastal export hubs. This infrastructure was not designed to foster internal African development. It did not link African communities or facilitate intra-African trade. Instead, it created an outward-oriented economic model. This model hindered the growth of diversified local economies. It prevented the emergence of robust internal markets. Africa's economic arteries were rerouted to serve external demands. The colonial system thus created a lasting economic dependency. African nations became reliant on exporting raw materials to Europe. They also depended on importing manufactured goods from their colonial masters. This dependency was deeply embedded into the economic fabric. It persisted long after formal independence was achieved. The structures of exploitation continued to shape economic realities. The colonial period fundamentally reoriented Africa's economic purpose. It transformed the continent from a self-sufficient entity into a supplier of raw materials. This reorientation laid the groundwork for persistent underdevelopment. The colonial focus on resource extraction left African economies profoundly vulnerable. This vulnerability stemmed from their narrow specialization in primary commodities. Diversification was actively discouraged or prevented. Many African nations became heavily reliant on a few key commodities. These included minerals, cash crops, or other raw materials. This reliance made them highly susceptible to global market fluctuations. When commodity prices dropped, these economies suffered immensely. Their lack of industrialization meant they could not add value to their own resources. They remained at the bottom of the global economic chain. The economic structures established during colonialism created a cycle of debt and dependence. Newly independent nations inherited economies designed for external benefit. They lacked the capital and infrastructure for self-sustaining growth. To develop, they often had to borrow from former colonial powers or international institutions. This borrowing frequently led to accumulating unsustainable debt. The terms of these loans often favored the lenders. Even after independence, many of the persistent exploitation structures remain. Multinational corporations, often with ties to former colonial powers, continued to control key industries. They maintained significant influence over resource extraction. Development aid, while often well-intentioned, sometimes inadvertently perpetuated these dependencies. It could create a reliance on external assistance rather than fostering internal capacity. Aid often came with conditions that further integrated African economies into global systems on unfavorable terms. The legacy of this economic structuring continues to shape Africa's current economic situation. It contributes to challenges like poverty, inequality, and limited industrialization. Understanding this history is crucial for addressing contemporary economic disparities. The economic impact of colonialism is not merely a historical footnote. It is a living reality that influences policy decisions and development strategies today. The patterns established centuries ago still resonate. This historical context is essential for comprehending why many African nations face specific economic hurdles. It highlights the systemic nature of underdevelopment. It underscores the need for equitable global economic partnerships. Beyond economics, the social and political landscape of Africa was irrevocably altered. One of the most enduring legacies is the arbitrary nature of colonial borders. These lines were drawn on maps in European capitals. They were drawn without any regard for existing ethnic, linguistic, or cultural boundaries. Communities that had coexisted for centuries were suddenly divided. Rival groups were often forced together within new national boundaries. These artificial borders became a significant source of tension. They fueled internal conflict and instability in the post-colonial era. Ethnic rivalries, exacerbated by colonial policies of divide and rule, often erupted into violence. The imposition of European political systems further exacerbated these issues. Parliamentary democracies or centralized administrations were often ill-suited to diverse African societies. Traditional governance structures were dismantled or undermined. These imported systems frequently lacked legitimacy or popular support. They often led to authoritarian rule or political fragmentation. The struggle for power within these imposed frameworks became intense. The ongoing effects of these colonial impositions are manifest today. They contribute to persistent ethnic tensions and political instability across the continent. Many nations continue to grapple with struggles for self-determination. The challenges of nation-building in post-colonial Africa are immense. They are compounded by the historical legacy of external imposition and internal division. The path to stable governance remains complex. Understanding these social and political legacies is vital. It helps explain the roots of many contemporary conflicts and governance challenges. It underscores the need for inclusive and context-specific solutions. The historical injustices of colonial rule continue to cast a long shadow. They impact social cohesion, political participation, and human rights. Addressing these legacies is crucial for fostering lasting peace and development. This historical perspective compels us to ask critical questions. How can nations overcome divisions imposed from without? What lessons can be learned from this past to build a more equitable future? Understanding how Europe underdeveloped Africa is not merely an academic exercise. It is crucial for comprehending the challenges and opportunities facing the continent today. This history provides essential context for current global dynamics. It is a complex story, far from simplistic narratives of progress or failure. It demands a nuanced appreciation of historical forces and their enduring impact. This narrative highlights the interconnectedness of global history. By acknowledging this past, we can better address present inequalities. We can work towards a future built on genuine partnership and mutual respect. This understanding is a prerequisite for true global citizenship. We encourage you to delve deeper into this vital subject. Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Like this video if you found it informative, and subscribe for more historical analyses. History rarely ends where we think it does. If this caught your attention, the next video uncovers the events that changed everything. Watch it now to complete the timeline.